The United Terran Fleet, UTF, flagship burned in the distance, its hull torn apart by relentless Zyrex fire. The battle was lost. Ryan Carter, a human fighter pilot, gritted his teeth as alarms blared inside his cockpit. His ship was barely holding together. Plasma blasts streaked past, rocking his fighter with each near miss. His squadron was gone, his comms silent. Only the deafening hum of his dying engines remained. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, frantically working the controls. But his luck ran out. A Zyrex warship locked onto him and fired. A direct hit. The force of the blast sent Ryan spinning through space. The fighter's systems failed, and a desperate warning flashed across his screen. EJTNNEDATLI. Ryan barely managed to pull the lever before his ship erupted in flames. His seat shot out, and his escape pod deployed. His breathing was ragged as he watched his fighter explode into debris. Floating helplessly in the void, he saw the battlefield shrink as his pod drifted away. Then, a dark shadow loomed over him. A Zyrex battlecruiser. Ryan's heart pounded. He knew what happened to captured humans. The Zyrex, a warlike alien species, showed no mercy. The pod's emergency beacon blinked. A tractor beam locked onto him. He clenched his fists. This was it. He was done. Aboard the enemy ship, Ryan's pod was pulled into the Zyrex warship's hangar. The moment it landed, the hatch was ripped open. Tall, armored Zyrex warriors surrounded him, their sharp claws gripping their weapons. Their reptilian eyes gleamed with suspicion. "Stand down," a firm voice commanded. Ryan looked up and froze. A Zyrex captain stood before him, her blue-scaled skin shimmering under the hangar lights. Her piercing golden eyes studied him. Unlike the others, she did not raise her weapon. "Captain Soraya Valketh." "Why would an enemy save me?" Ryan muttered under his breath. The Zyrex warriors growled, but Soraya raised a hand, silencing them. "You are under my protection now, human," she said, her voice steady. Ryan narrowed his eyes. He had heard stories of Zyrex cruelty, but something about Soraya was different. She wasn't acting like the merciless warriors he had been trained to fight. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but one thing was clear. His fate was no longer in his hands. Ryan's head throbbed. His body felt heavy, like he had been crushed under a massive weight. A faint humming sound filled his ears, and the air smelled different. Not sterile like a Terran ship, but something else. Metallic, with a hint of something sharp. He forced his eyes open. He wasn't in his fighter. He wasn't even in his escape pod. The walls around him were sleek, dark, and pulsing with strange energy lines. He lay on a metal slab, but it wasn't a prison cell. At least, not a normal one. An alien ship, a Zyrex ship. Ryan shot up, but the movement sent a sharp pain through his body. He groaned, clutching his side. A voice spoke from the shadows. "You should not move too quickly. You are injured." Ryan turned his head and saw her, the Zyrex captain who had saved him. Captain Soraya Valketh stood at the doorway, her golden eyes locked onto him. She wasn't wearing a helmet, and for the first time, he could see her properly. Her blue scales shimmered under the dim lighting, and a deep scar ran down her cheek. Her expression was unreadable. Ryan's hands curled into fists. He was a prisoner. But why had she saved him? "Where am I?" he demanded. His voice was rough, dry. "On my ship," Soraya answered calmly. "You were unconscious for several hours. Your injuries have been treated." Ryan's mind raced. His last memory was the battle, his ship being hit, ejecting into space. Then this Zyrex captain had pulled him aboard instead of killing him. "Why am I still alive?" Ryan asked, narrowing his eyes. Soraya studied him for a moment before answering. "You do not remember, do you?" she said. "You saved my people once, whether you realized it or not. Now, I return the favor." Ryan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Soraya tilted her head. "Months ago, during a skirmish on Outpost Vectra, Your squadron had the chance to destroy one of our transport ships. Instead, you let it go." Ryan blinked. He did remember that battle. His commander had given him the order to fire on a Zyrex transport, but Ryan had hesitated. The scans showed no weapons, only civilians. He had chosen to let them go. "And because of that, you saved my kin," Soraya said. "In Zyrex culture, such a debt cannot be ignored. I am bound by honor to repay it." Ryan exhaled slowly, processing her words. A Zyrex warrior, a captain, was risking everything just to return a favor. His head was still spinning, but one thing was clear. Soraya had made a dangerous choice, and now both of their fates were tied together. Ryan leaned back against the cold wall of his chamber, staring at the strange patterns etched into the alien metal. Why would she risk everything for me? A Terran soldier who, by all accounts, should have been her enemy. He wasn't stupid. He knew Soraya's actions were unusual. The Zyrex were known for their rigid hierarchy and ruthless efficiency. Disobeying orders, even out of a sense of honor, could mean death for her. The door slid open with a faint hiss, and Soraya stepped in. Her movements were smooth, almost graceful, though there was an edge to her demeanor. She was calm, but not relaxed. "You seem well enough to walk," she said, her voice firm. "Come, you must eat." Ryan hesitated, then pushed himself to his feet. His legs were shaky, but they held. As he followed her down the corridor, he noticed the crew's stares. Some looked away quickly, but others glared openly. Their disdain wasn't subtle. "Not everyone is happy about this arrangement," Ryan muttered, glancing at the Zyrex officers. Soraya didn't slow her pace. "It doesn't matter. I gave my word." "But at what cost?" Ryan asked. "Your crew doesn't trust me. They barely seem to trust you anymore." She paused, turning to face him. Her golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Zyrex honor is not something we take lightly. I am responsible for your life now, and that responsibility will not change, regardless of their opinions." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Even if it puts you at risk?" Soraya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she resumed walking, leading him to a small mess hall. The room was stark and functional. No decorations, just a long metal table surrounded by benches. She motioned for him to sit. A Zyrex crew member approached, setting down a tray of food. The alien looked at Ryan with barely concealed contempt before leaving without a word. Ryan picked up a piece of something that looked vaguely like bread, though it was gray and slightly sticky. He took a tentative bite. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly appetizing either. "I don't understand you," Ryan said after a moment, breaking the silence. "You could have just let me drift out there. No one would have blamed you." Soraya's gaze remained steady. "Do you regret my decision?" "No," he replied quickly, "but I'm not sure I can repay you. My people won't exactly welcome me back if they find out I've been on a Zyrex ship. And if your superiors catch us—" "They won't catch us," she interrupted. "This ship is fast, and I know how to avoid their patrols." Her confidence was clear, but Ryan still felt the weight of their situation. They were both fugitives now, a human pilot and an alien captain who had defied her empire. Ryan spent most of the next few hours sitting in the corner of the mess hall, his mind racing. Soraya's calm confidence hadn't completely reassured him. If anything, it only made the stakes clearer. She might believe she could outmaneuver the Zyrex authorities, but how long could that really last? He could still hear the crew whispering whenever he walked through the corridors. Some words were sharp, barely controlled anger. Others were muttered questions, wondering what their captain had gotten them into. By the time Soraya returned to the mess hall, Ryan had reached his breaking point. "This isn't going to work," he said, standing abruptly. "They don't trust me. They barely even trust you, and if your fleet comes looking—" "They won't find us," Soraya said firmly, cutting him off. Ryan shook his head. "You don't know that. You're risking your life for someone you barely know, and now your crew is ready to turn on you." She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You underestimate the bonds of honor," she said. "My crew may question me, but they will not betray me. Not yet." "Not yet," Ryan echoed. "That's not exactly reassuring." Soraya's voice softened. "Ryan, I am aware of the danger, but we cannot go back. I cannot return you to the Terran fleet. They would never trust you again. And I cannot return to my people. They'd execute you." Ryan finished, his tone grim. "So what then? We just keep running." Soraya straightened, her golden eyes sharp. "No, we don't run. We plan." Ryan crossed his arms. "Plan what?" "An escape. A new identity. You think we can just disappear?" "Not disappear," she said. "Survive." It was the first time she'd said the word, and it struck Ryan more than he expected. It wasn't just a matter of honor or duty anymore. This was about survival. For both of them. He sat back down, rubbing his face. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes," Soraya replied. "But we must act quickly. The longer we remain in one place, the greater the chance that someone will report our position. I have charted a course to a neutral system. There is a small outpost there, one that operates outside the reach of both our governments. We can find temporary shelter, restock supplies, and figure out our next move." Ryan frowned. "And what happens when the Terran fleet shows up looking for me? Or the Zureks come after you?" Soraya met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "When that time comes, we will be ready. Together." There was no arrogance in her voice, no false sense of security. She was simply stating a fact. Despite the whispers, despite the tension among her crew, she believed they had a chance. Ryan took a deep breath, his mind still spinning. He didn't trust her completely, not yet. But for now, he had no other choice. Their fates were tied, whether he liked it or not. Ryan sat quietly in the corner of the ship's observation deck. He had begun to learn some of the Zyrek ship's strange routines, the faint, rhythmic hum of its engines, the sharp, metallic clang when certain doors slid shut, and the occasional low, rumbling voice of Soraya giving commands. The crew, however, had become increasingly restless. Ryan didn't need to understand their language fully to sense the tension in their gestures and tones. Fewer of them met his gaze when he passed by. Those who did seemed to regard him with a mix of suspicion and barely restrained hostility. It wasn't just him they distrusted, it was Soraya. "She's losing control," one of the crew members hissed in their native tongue during a maintenance check. Ryan caught only fragments of the conversation, but the meaning was clear enough. "It's a risk we can't afford," another grumbled. "She's putting all our lives on the line." For what? A human. That word, human, carried such disdain that Ryan felt his fists clench involuntarily. He knew better than to react, though. Right now, staying invisible was his best option. Later that cycle, as Ryan walked through the dim corridors, he noticed a group of Zyrex officers gathered near the command deck. Their voices were low, conspiratorial. Soraya stood apart, her arms crossed, listening with a rigid expression. "This is a dangerous gamble," one officer, Vale, if Ryan remembered correctly, argued. He seemed to be Soraya's second-in-command. Bringing the human aboard was one thing. But taking the ship into neutral space without proper orders, that's treason, Captain. "It's survival," Soraya replied calmly. "You are welcome to remain on the ship or leave once we reach the outpost. The choice is yours. And when the High Command finds us, when they question why we harbored an enemy, what will you tell them then?" Vel's voice rose slightly, echoing through the corridor. Ryan stopped walking, staying hidden around the corner. He could see Soraya's face tighten. "I will deal with the consequences," she said firmly. "And I suggest you remember your place." Val's expression darkened, but he stepped back and gave a curt nod. The other officers quickly dispersed, but the air in the corridor was thick with unease. That evening, Ryan found himself sitting across from Soraya in the small bare mess hall. She was quieter than usual, her sharp golden eyes focused on the gray meal in front of her. "Your crew," Ryan began hesitantly. "They're not happy about this." "About me." "They will follow orders," Soraya replied simply, though her tone lacked its usual conviction. Ryan frowned. "Will they, or are you just hoping they will?" Soraya looked up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "They will follow orders," she repeated, more firmly this time. But even as she said it, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the rift among the crew was growing. And so were the dangers ahead. The ship's atmosphere grew heavier with each passing hour. Ryan could feel it, even in the silence. The crew moved through the corridors with tense, hurried steps, their glances sharper, their voices clipped. Soraya remained composed, but Ryan could see the weight she carried. It all came to a breaking point when a sudden, deafening alarm pierced the air. Red lights flashed along the walls, and the ship's mechanical voice spoke in the Zyrex language. Words Ryan couldn't understand but knew meant trouble. Soraya was already on her feet, her blue-scaled hand gripping a console as she shouted commands. The crew responded, moving to their stations, but the tension didn't fade. Instead, it intensified. "Stay here," Soraya ordered Ryan as she hurried toward the bridge. Ryan nodded but couldn't sit still. Something was wrong, more wrong than usual. Minutes later, the ship shuddered. A faint, muffled explosion rattled the deck. Ryan grabbed onto the nearest bulkhead to steady himself. He could hear shouting now, echoing down the halls, followed by a single chilling sound, the unmistakable hum of weapons being drawn. His pulse quickened. He had no idea what was happening, but staying put no longer felt like an option. Ryan pushed himself into the corridor, keeping low, and headed in the direction of the noise. As he rounded a corner, he saw a group of Zyrex officers blocking the main hallway. They weren't acting as security. They were standing against the wall, weapons raised. "Commander Vale," one of them called out. Ryan's stomach sank. Vale. The tall, scarred officer emerged from a side passage, his sharp reptilian eyes gleaming with determination. He held a blade-like weapon in one hand and a small glowing device in the other. The way he moved, with purpose and confidence, made it clear this was no accident. Ryan's worst fear was confirmed when Vale barked orders to his loyalists. "The captain has lost her way. We will not let her bring shame upon this crew. Seize control of the bridge." Ryan didn't wait to hear more. He turned and sprinted back toward the bridge, his mind racing. Soraya was in danger. When he arrived, he found Soraya already facing down a group of mutineers. She stood with her weapon drawn, her golden eyes blazing. "Stand down, Vale," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't the way." "You have betrayed the Zyrex," Vale growled. "Your foolish honor has put us all at risk. If you won't correct your mistake, then we will correct it for you." Soraya raised her weapon. "You've made a mistake, Commander." In a flash, the room erupted into chaos. Vale's loyalists attacked, forcing Soraya and the few crew members still loyal to her into a desperate fight. Ryan, unarmed, could only watch from the doorway. But he knew one thing. If Soraya fell, he was finished too. Soraya's crew had been fractured, but her authority remained unbroken. With Vale and his loyalists defeated, the ship fell into a tense, uneasy calm. Ryan couldn't help but notice the looks exchanged between the remaining officers. Wary, uncertain. Some still resented him, but no one openly challenged Soraya now. In the days that followed, Soraya kept a tight grip on the ship's operations. She held frequent briefings with the crew, maintaining a calm, steady demeanor that slowly brought some stability. But Ryan saw through it. She was under immense pressure. She had saved his life, yes, but at what cost? One quiet cycle, Ryan found her alone on the observation deck. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. "You should be resting," Ryan said, breaking the silence. Soraya didn't turn. "Rest is a luxury we cannot afford." Ryan hesitated, then stepped closer. Vale's coup failed. The crew seems to be falling back in line. Isn't that enough for now? Finally, she turned her head toward him. Her golden eyes, usually so sharp, looked weary. Discipline alone won't save us. The Zyrex fleet will be looking for us. I must ensure this crew survives long enough to reach safety. Ryan leaned against the cold metal wall. You keep saying safety, but where exactly are we going? Soraya took a deep breath. There is a neutral system near the edge of known space. The Zyrex and Terran fleets avoid it because it holds no strategic value. But it is also home to independent traders, smugglers, and outcasts. It's not ideal, but it's our best chance. Once there, we can resupply, regroup, and perhaps plan what comes next. Ryan frowned. And what is next, exactly? Running for the rest of our lives? I don't know, Soraya admitted quietly. I only know that returning to my people is no longer an option. The following cycle, the ship approached the neutral system. The crew worked in tense silence. No one wanted to admit it, but the risk of pursuit was real. If a Zyrex patrol ship intercepted them, there would be no second chance. Ryan sat in the mess hall, absent-mindedly poking at his food. His appetite had vanished. He could hear muffled voices through the walls, Soraya giving commands, the crew responding in clipped, hurried tones. Suddenly, the ship jolted. An alarm blared, and a red light washed over the corridors. Ryan jumped to his feet as the intercom buzzed to life. Captain to all crew. Soraya's voice came through, calm but firm. We have detected a Zyrex patrol. Battle stations. Ryan's heart sank. They hadn't even reached the neutral system yet. He hurried toward the bridge, his mind racing. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. When he arrived, Soraya stood at the center of the bridge, issuing commands with an air of authority that hadn't wavered. The crew moved quickly, the tension palpable. Ryan, she said without turning, if we don't shake them before we reach the system's edge, we'll be fighting for our lives. Can I count on you? He swallowed hard. What do you need me to do? Soraya glanced at him, a faint glimmer of something almost like trust in her golden eyes. Be ready. The Zyrex patrol ship was gaining on them, its weapons glowing menacingly on the main display. Soraya stood at the center of the bridge, her expression calm, but her mind racing. Every order she gave was sharp, precise, and the crew followed without hesitation. Ryan stayed back, near the edge of the bridge, unsure if he was helping or just getting in the way. What are our options? He asked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Soraya didn't look at him. There's only one. Outmaneuver them. We can't outrun them. Ryan asked, though he already knew the answer. This ship wasn't designed for speed, Soraya replied. We rely on tactical positioning and calculated risks, and right now, they're better positioned than we are. The crew around them worked feverishly, adjusting shields, firing countermeasures, and relaying information. Ryan could feel the tension rising like an invisible wave. The patrol ship was closing in, and Soraya's officers knew what that meant. If the Zyrex caught up, their captain would be declared a traitor, the crew would face court-martial, or worse, and Ryan himself would likely be executed on the spot. A sharp tone sounded, and one of the officers turned. They're powering up their primary weapons. Ryan tensed. What can I do? He asked quickly. Soraya glanced at him, her golden eyes narrowing. This isn't your fight, human. Stay out of the way. Her words stung, but Ryan didn't argue. He knew that, in her mind, keeping him alive was her duty. But he wasn't about to sit idle while their lives hung in the balance. He turned and made his way off the bridge. If he couldn't help here, he'd find another way. He remembered seeing a storage bay full of spare equipment, maybe something there could give them an edge. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he was still an engineer at heart. In the storage bay, Ryan sifted through crates of components, scanning for anything that might be useful. A faint hum in the background told him the engines were running harder now, pushing the ship to its limit. His fingers closed around a device that looked familiar. A Zyrex energy dampener. If he could modify it, maybe he could scramble the patrol ship's targeting systems. Working quickly, he dismantled and rewired the dampener. His mind focused despite the distant sounds of battle. Back on the bridge, the situation was growing more dire. The Zyrex patrol ship had closed the gap, and the crew was struggling to maintain shields. Soraya's calm facade was beginning to crack. Just as she opened her mouth to give the order to engage, a new signal appeared on the console. The patrol ship's weapons array flickered, then powered down momentarily. "What just happened?" one of the officers asked, stunned. Soraya looked over her shoulder as Ryan walked onto the bridge, holding a small modified device. "I bought us a little time," he said. Her golden eyes locked on him. "You did this?" Ryan nodded. "It won't last long, but it's something." For the first time since the pursuit began, Soraya allowed herself a small, faint smile. "It's enough." With the patrol ship's systems scrambled, Soraya ordered the crew to adjust course. In those precious moments of confusion, the Zyrex cruiser slipped into the neutral system's border. They weren't safe yet, but for now, they had a chance. The Zyrex patrol was still on their tail, though the temporary scrambling of its systems had given them a slim head start. Soraya was at the command center, her golden eyes fixed on the main display as she directed the crew. The bridge lights flickered faintly as the ship's engines pushed to their limits. "Adjust shields to maximum forward," Soraya ordered, her voice steady. One of her officers hesitated. "Captain, our power reserves." "Do it," Soraya said firmly. "We need to hold them off just a little longer." Ryan stood near the edge of the bridge, keeping quiet but watching closely. The makeshift dampener he'd rigged had done its job, but now he could see that every crew member was on edge. Some cast quick, uncertain glances toward their captain. Others avoided eye contact entirely. The tension in the room was palpable, and Ryan could sense that more than just the patrol ship's weapons were weighing on everyone's mind. The crew's loyalty was cracking. Soraya's second-in-command, Commander Vale's absence was still keenly felt. Though Vale's attempted mutiny had been put down, the fallout lingered. Several crew members still resented the presence of a human on board. They whispered among themselves in the lower decks, questioning Soraya's decisions and her honor. Ryan didn't need to understand their language to know that he was at the center of the storm. He could see it in the way they avoided him or stiffened when he walked by. And yet, as much as he wanted to keep his head down, he couldn't ignore the simple truth. Without Soraya's choices, he'd already be dead. As the ship passed the outer boundary of the neutral system, Soraya finally allowed herself to exhale. The patrol ship was still trailing behind. But the closer they got to the neutral zone, the less likely the Zyrex would risk a full assault. "Captain," one of the officers said hesitantly, "what if they continue pursuit? We have no allies here." Soraya's voice was firm. "If they pursue us into neutral territory, they risk violating interstellar law. It's a gamble they might not be willing to take." The officer nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. Ryan took a step forward. "What if they don't care about the laws?" Soraya turned her golden gaze on him. "Then we will fight. But we will not fight alone." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "There is a station within this system," Soraya said, "an independent outpost that trades in technology and information. If we can reach it, we may find allies, or at least resources to repair the ship and plan our next move." The patrol ship lingered at the edge of their sensors, as if deciding whether to continue the chase. The crew was exhausted, the ship's systems strained, but for the first time in hours, there was a faint glimmer of hope. Ryan glanced at Soraya. She stood tall, her focus unshaken. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. "Whatever happens next," Ryan said quietly, "we've made it this far, thanks to you." Soraya didn't reply, but she gave him a small nod, one that carried more meaning than words. They weren't out of danger yet, but together, they had a chance. The neutral system's main station came into view on the ship's display, a sprawling web of steel and light suspended against the darkness of space. To Ryan, it looked like salvation. To Soraya, it was simply the next move in a dangerous game. Soraya issued a string of commands, her voice steady as always, but Ryan could sense the tension in the air. Every crew member's movements were quick, precise, as if the act of docking itself were a battle. "We'll secure repairs, fuel, and supplies here," Soraya explained, her golden eyes fixed on the station ahead. "But we can't linger. This is a temporary sanctuary, not a safe haven." Ryan nodded, understanding. The neutral system might offer a moment's reprieve, but they were far from out of danger. The Zyrex fleet could still track them down. The Terran authorities would have questions if they found him here. This station was a place to regroup, not settle. As the ship docked, Ryan felt the vibrations run through the deck plates. The hiss of pressurization followed, and Soraya motioned for him to stay close. "We'll move quickly," she said. Inside the station, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the chatter of countless voices. Species from across the galaxy mingled here. Traders, smugglers, mercenaries. Ryan kept his head down, grateful for the unfamiliar faces. None of them knew who he was or why he was with Soraya. As they made their way through the bustling corridors, Ryan noticed Soraya's crew sticking close, their expressions guarded. They weren't just following orders. They were watching each other and him. The events of the past cycles, Val's mutiny, the pursuit, the near disaster, had left scars that wouldn't heal easily. At a small trading post near the station's core, Soraya negotiated for the supplies they needed. Her tone was sharp, her words calculated. Ryan stayed silent, observing her in action. It was clear she commanded respect, even from those who disagreed with her. After securing the deal, Soraya turned to Ryan. "You're quiet," she noted. Ryan shrugged, "Just trying not to get in the way." "You're not in the way," she replied, her voice softer. "Your instincts helped us survive. That counts for something." Ryan blinked. He hadn't expected the compliment. "I just did what I could." "That's more than most," Soraya said. Back aboard the ship, as the crew worked to load supplies and repair damaged systems, Ryan found himself standing beside Soraya in the observation room. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of unknowns. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. Soraya folded her arms, her gaze fixed on the view. "We keep moving. We stay ahead of them." And after that, her expression softened just slightly. "We'll find out together." In that moment, Ryan realized that this was his path now. Not with the Terran fleet, not back on Earth, but here, standing beside someone who had risked everything to save him. As the ship's engines hummed back to life, he knew they weren't just running from something. They were moving toward something new, together.